Story number 1, The Voice in the Empty Hallway. I used to think staying late at school was one of the safest parts of my week. By the time the final bell rang, the place transformed completely. During the day, it was loud enough that teachers had to raise their voices just to get through a lesson. But after 5 o'clock, it became so quiet you could hear the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. I actually liked it. I was a junior in high school, and every Tuesday and Thursday I stayed after classes for robotics club. Most of the other students left as soon as practice ended, but I usually stayed behind to help our advisor, Mr. Reynolds, clean up and lock away the equipment. He trusted me. I liked having something to do before going home. That Thursday started like every other. We spent about 2 hours testing a robot we'd been building for an upcoming competition. It wasn't going well. One of the drive motors kept cutting out, and everyone was getting frustrated. Around 5:30, the football game started, so nearly everyone packed up early to go watch it. Within 5 minutes, it was just me and Mr. Reynolds. He looked around the room and sighed. "Think you can help me put the storage bins back downstairs?" "Sure." He handed me a classroom key. "I'll finish shutting everything down here. Meet me in the engineering lab." I grabbed the first plastic bin and stepped into the hallway. The silence hit immediately. It wasn't creepy. Not yet. Just different. Without hundreds of students talking, the building sounded alive in a completely different way. Air vents hummed. Somewhere far away, metal clanged softly. A drinking fountain clicked as it shut itself off. The kind of sounds you never notice until you're completely alone. I walked past the library. One lamp inside was still on. I figured the librarian had forgotten it. No big deal. The engineering classroom was on the first floor, so I carried the bin downstairs, unlocked the room, set everything inside, and headed back up. As I reached the second floor again, I heard a locker close. Not slam. Just click. Thunk. The sound echoed through the hallway. I stopped for a second. Listened. Nothing. I smiled to myself. Probably the custodian. The evening janitor, Frank, was almost always working after school. He pushed one of those big gray carts and wore headphones almost every shift. It made perfect sense. I kept walking. When I reached the robotics room, I picked up the second storage bin. As I turned back into the hallway, I noticed one classroom door standing slightly open. Maybe 6 inches. I was almost positive it had been closed a minute earlier. I stared at it for a couple seconds. The room inside was completely dark. I considered walking over to shut it. Instead, I shrugged. Teachers forgot doors all the time. I carried the second bin downstairs. Mr. Reynolds was waiting outside the engineering room. "Everything okay?" "Yeah." "You look like something's bothering you." "I thought somebody was upstairs." He chuckled. "If it's anybody, it's Frank." "Yeah, probably." We finished organizing the equipment around 6:15. He checked his watch. "I've got to stop by the principal's office before I head out." Then he tossed me the classroom key. "Mind locking up behind you?" "No problem. I'll grab the key tomorrow." He disappeared down another hallway. I packed my backpack, switched off the lights, locked the engineering room, and started walking toward the main entrance. Outside, it was already dark. The windows had turned into mirrors. Instead of seeing outside, you mostly saw your own reflection. Halfway down the hallway, I heard footsteps. Soft. Steady. Behind me. 1, 2, 3. I stopped walking. The footsteps stopped too. I turned around. The hallway was empty. No teachers. No students. No custodian. Nothing. I waited another 10 seconds. Silence. I laughed quietly. You're just tired. I turned back around and kept walking. About 15 seconds later, the footsteps came back. This time they sounded closer. Not running. Not trying to catch me. Just following my pace. Whenever I walked, they walked. Whenever I slowed down, they slowed down. I spun around so quickly my backpack nearly slipped off my shoulder. Again. Nothing. I remember standing there thinking how ridiculous I must have looked. It had to be echoes. Old buildings make strange sounds. That's what I kept telling myself. When I reached the front lobby, I felt relieved. The security office sat beside the main entrance. Officer Daniels was usually there until 7. Except, his chair was empty. A handwritten note rested on the desk. Back in 10 minutes. Perfect. The one time I wanted to see another person. Nobody was there. I tried pushing the front doors. Locked. After 6 o'clock, the doors could only be opened from the security desk. I checked my phone. 6:32 p.m. No signal. Not unusual. The front lobby always had terrible reception. I leaned against the wall to wait. That's when I heard another sound. Not footsteps. A door. Somewhere deeper inside the school. Slowly closing. Click. I looked down the hallway. Nothing moved. Then, one section of the hallway lights turned on. They were motion activated. Normally they stayed dim unless someone walked underneath them. The first section lit up. Then the second. Then the third. One after another. Each set of lights getting closer to the lobby. Closer to me. I expected to see Frank pushing his cart around the corner. Or another teacher. Anyone. But no one appeared. The lights continued switching on anyway. Finally, the last section illuminated just outside the lobby. The hallway beyond it was completely empty. I felt my stomach tighten. Then I heard a man's voice. Quiet. Calm. Almost friendly. Is someone still here? It came from somewhere nearby. Close enough that it didn't echo. Close enough that whoever spoke was inside the lobby with me. I froze. The voice hadn't come from down the hallway. It hadn't come from outside the front doors. It sounded like it was only a few feet away. I looked around the lobby. The security office was empty. The front entrance was locked. The trophy cases lined one wall. The reception desk sat in front of the administration offices. There was nowhere obvious for someone to be standing. Hello? I called. No answer. For a few seconds, everything was silent again. Then, I heard a soft scrape. Like the sole of a shoe sliding across the floor. It came from behind the reception desk. I took one cautious step backward. Frank? I asked. Nothing. I knew it probably wasn't him. Frank always answered when people called his name. Besides, I would have heard the wheels of his cleaning cart. This sound was different. I slowly backed toward the front doors. Instinctively, I reached for the handle again. Locked. Still locked. My heart started beating a little faster. Officer Daniels? I called louder. Silence. Then the voice came again. I thought everyone left. This time I knew exactly where it came from. Behind the reception desk. Whoever it was couldn't see me clearly. They were speaking almost like they were trying to figure out if someone was still in the building. Every alarm bell in my head started going off. If it had been a teacher, they would have simply walked out. If it had been Officer Daniels, he would have identified himself immediately. Instead, Whoever this was stayed hidden. I didn't answer. I quietly stepped away from the lobby and into the hallway leading toward the science wing. My backpack suddenly felt twice as heavy. Every zipper seemed loud. Every breath echoed. I was only 20 feet away when I heard movement behind me. Not running. Walking. Slowly. Deliberately. I looked over my shoulder. A man stepped out from behind the reception desk. I had never seen him before. He wasn't wearing a school badge. He wasn't carrying cleaning equipment. He looked to be somewhere in his 40s. Dark hoodie. Baseball cap pulled low. Jeans. Nothing unusual. Except he shouldn't have been there. Our eyes met for less than a second. Then he smiled. Not a friendly smile. The kind people give when they've just realized they've been caught. "Hey," he called casually. "You got a minute?" Every instinct I had screamed. No. I turned and walked faster. Not running. Not yet. Behind me. His footsteps matched mine. "Hey." His voice was louder now. "I just need to ask you something." I didn't answer. I rounded the corner toward the science hallway. The footsteps sped up. So did mine. Another corner. Another empty hallway. No teachers. No custodians. No one. The school suddenly felt enormous. There were dozens of classrooms. Hundreds of places someone could hide. I pulled my phone out. Still no signal. I tried calling 911 anyway. The call failed immediately. My hands started shaking. Behind me. The footsteps stopped. I risked a glance over my shoulder. The hallway was empty. He was gone. I slowed down. Maybe he'd given up. Maybe he'd realized I wasn't going to stop. Then I heard something much worse. A door opened somewhere ahead of me. Not behind. Ahead. I stopped walking. There were only two possibilities. Either another staff member had just come out of a classroom, or the man had somehow gotten in front of me. I listened. Silence. Then, very softly, a classroom door creaked wider. I backed away without taking my eyes off the hallway. Suddenly, a small voice called out. "Who's there?" I nearly jumped. A boy, maybe 12 years old, stepped out of the science lab. He wore a backpack almost as big as he was. "I thought everyone left," he said. "So did I replied. "Why are you still here?" "My mom's picking me up." My stomach dropped. He'd been alone this whole time. I walked toward him as quickly as I could without looking panicked. "Listen," I said quietly. "We need to find a teacher." He looked confused. "Why?" Before I could answer, we both heard it. Footsteps. Coming from the hallway behind us. Slow. Steady. Getting closer. The boy looked past me. "Who's that?" I turned. At the far end of the hallway, the man in the hoodie had appeared again. This time, he wasn't pretending anymore. He wasn't smiling. He was just walking toward us. Without saying a word. The man kept walking toward us. Not fast. Not slow. Just steady. The hallway suddenly felt much longer than it had a minute ago. The seventh grader looked up at me. "Do you know him?" I didn't take my eyes off the man. "No." The boy glanced back at the science classroom. "My phone's inside." "Forget it." "What?" "Come on." I grabbed his backpack strap, not hard, just enough to guide him, and we started moving in the opposite direction. Behind us, the footsteps got faster. I looked over my shoulder. The man had quickened his pace. Not running. But he was definitely trying to close the distance. That was all I needed to know. Run. The boy didn't ask any questions. We sprinted down the hallway. Our footsteps echoed off the tile floor. My backpack slammed against my shoulders with every stride. We rounded a corner toward the administration wing, hoping someone was still there. Every office was dark. Every door was locked. I could hear the man behind us now. Closer. Much closer. Then the boy pointed ahead. The gym. The evening volleyball team sometimes practiced late. If anyone was still in the building, they'd be there. We ran as fast as we could. I shoved open the double doors leading into the gym hallway. Locked. The practice had already ended. For a split second, I thought we'd reached a dead end. Then I remembered something. Just across from the gym was the custodian's maintenance room. If Frank was anywhere, it would be there. I pounded on the metal door. Frank! Nothing. I hit it again. Frank! Open the door. Behind us. The footsteps stopped. I turned. The man stood at the end of the hallway. Maybe 30 feet away. He wasn't trying to hide anymore. He looked at both of us. Then he calmly started walking forward again. The boy whispered, "What do we do?" Before I could answer, a loud voice echoed from behind the maintenance door. "Who's out there?" I had never been so relieved to hear someone. "It's me," I shouted. "There's a guy following us." The door flew open. Frank stepped out holding a heavy flashlight. "What guy?" I pointed down the hallway. The man froze. For the first time, his expression changed. He looked past us at Frank. Then he turned around and walked away. Not running. Just walking. As if nothing had happened. Frank immediately grabbed the radio clipped to his belt. "I need security at the gym hallway. Right now." Within seconds, he told us to stay inside the maintenance room. He locked the door. The room smelled like cleaning supplies and fresh paint. The boy was breathing so hard he could barely speak. Neither of us said anything. About 2 minutes later, Officer Daniels burst through the door with another staff member. "What happened?" I explained everything. The voice. The reception desk. The hallway. The man following us. The officer's face changed the moment I mentioned the lobby. "I wasn't at the desk because I was checking an alarm on the opposite side of campus," he said. "I was gone less than 10 minutes. Police arrived shortly afterward. They searched the entire school. Every classroom. Every hallway. Every storage room. The man was gone. But they did find something. One of the side exit doors near the auditorium had been forced open. The lock was damaged from the inside. Whoever the man was, he hadn't wandered into the school by accident. He had found a way in. The security cameras showed him entering nearly 20 minutes before I first heard the locker close. For almost half an hour. He had been inside the building while teachers, custodians, and a handful of students were still finishing up. The footage showed him avoiding occupied hallways. Waiting. Watching. Moving only when people were alone. Then the cameras lost him in a section of the school where one of the older security cameras had been out of service for weeks. The police never identified him. They circulated still images to nearby schools, but as far as I know, nothing ever came of it. The 7th graders' parents thanked me over and over. Honestly, I don't think I did anything special. I was just as scared as he was. But one thing has stayed with me ever since. People always say schools are safest when they're full of teachers, staff, and security. They're probably right. But once the buses leave, the classrooms go dark. And the hallways empty out. A school becomes a maze of long corridors, locked doors, and blind corners. Sometimes I think about that man's first question. Is someone still here? At the time, it sounded almost polite. Now I hear it differently. It wasn't a greeting. It was a search. He wasn't trying to start a conversation. He was trying to find out if there was anyone left who was completely alone. Story number 3, the last classroom to be locked. I worked as a night custodian at a high school for almost 3 years. Most people assume the job is boring. For the most part, it is. You empty trash cans, sweep hallways, lock classroom doors, clean up whatever students leave behind. After a while, you know every hallway, every stairwell, every door that sticks when it's humid, and every light that flickers before it burns out. You also get used to being alone. Or at least, you convince yourself you are. My shift started at 3:30 every afternoon, right as students were heading home. The first couple of hours were always busy. Teachers stayed late grading papers. Coaches held practice. Clubs met after school. There were always people around. By 7 o'clock, though, the school emptied out. That's when my real work began. I had a routine. Always the same. Start on the 3rd floor. Lock every classroom. Work my way down. Finish in the gym. Then check every exterior door before leaving around 11. I liked routines. They kept the job simple. One Friday in late January, everything started normally. There had been a basketball game that evening, so the school stayed busy later than usual. By a little after 8, the players, parents, and coaches had all left. The principal signed out. The office lights went dark. As far as I knew, the only people left in the building were me and the security officer making his rounds outside. I pushed my cleaning cart to the 3rd floor and started locking classrooms. Room 301. Locked. Room 302. Locked. Room 303. Locked. Nothing unusual. When I reached room 309, I noticed the lights were still on. That wasn't uncommon. Teachers forgot all the time. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The room was empty. Chairs pushed in. Whiteboard erased. Computer turned off. I switched off the lights and locked the door behind me. As I walked away, I heard a chair scrape across the floor. Inside room 309. I stopped. Maybe I'd imagined it. Schools make noises. Heating systems. Old pipes. Metal furniture settling. Still, I unlocked the classroom again. Turned the lights back on. Everything looked exactly the way I'd left it. Every chair was in place. No windows were open. Nothing had fallen. I checked behind the teacher's desk. Inside the storage closet. Even under the tables. Empty. Old building, I muttered. I turned the lights off again. Locked the door. Continued down the hallway. 5 classrooms later. My radio crackled. Mike. It was the security officer. You still on the 3rd floor? Yeah. You see anybody up there? No. Okay. His voice sounded casual. I didn't think much of it. What happened? I thought I saw someone through one of the front windows. Teacher? Couldn't tell. I looked down the empty hallway. No one's up here. Probably reflections. Probably. The radio clicked off. I kept working. Room 315. Locked. Room 316. Locked. When I reached the end of the hallway, I turned around. Something immediately caught my eye. The lights in room 309 were on again. I just stood there. Maybe I'd forgotten to switch them off. It happens. You get distracted. I pushed my cart all the way back. Unlocked the classroom. The lights were definitely on. Everything else looked normal. I frowned. Guess I'm getting tired. I switched them off. Locked the room again. This time, I physically tugged on the handle twice to make sure it latched. Then I marked the room as finished on my checklist. As I started walking away, my radio crackled again. Mike? Go ahead. You sure nobody's with you? I stopped. Yeah. Because I just watched someone walk past a third-floor window. My grip tightened on the radio. You're serious? Yeah. They disappeared before I got a good look. I looked at the long row of classroom doors. Every one of them was locked. Every hallway light was on. And as far as I could see, I was completely alone. Then, from somewhere behind me, a classroom door closed. Slowly. Click. I turned around. Room 309 was standing open. For a few seconds, I just stared at the open door. I knew I'd locked it. Not only had I locked it, I'd pulled on the handle twice to make sure it latched. There was no way it should have been open. I picked up my radio. Tom? The security officer answered almost immediately. Yeah? Stay on the radio. What's wrong? I've got a classroom door open that I already locked. There was a brief pause. You want me to come up? I looked down the empty hallway. Not yet. I didn't want to sound ridiculous. Doors sometimes didn't latch properly. Old buildings had quirks. I pushed my cleaning cart toward room 309 again. The closer I got, the quieter everything felt. Even the air conditioner seemed to stop humming. The classroom lights were off. The doorway was completely dark. I stood just outside. Hello? Nothing. I reached in and flipped the light switch. The fluorescent lights flickered once, then came on. The room looked exactly as it had before. Rows of desks. Teacher's desk. Whiteboard. Nothing out of place. I searched every corner again. Storage closet. Behind the cabinets. Nothing. I was about to leave, when I noticed something different. One student desk near the back of the room had been pulled out. Only a foot or so. Just enough that it no longer lined up with the others. I was almost certain it hadn't been like that earlier. I pushed it back into place. Turned off the lights. Locked the classroom. This time I checked the handle 3 times. Then I continued down the hall. I hadn't gone more than 30 feet when my radio crackled. Mike. Yeah? I've got movement. Where? 3rd floor east windows. I stopped walking. I'm on the east hallway. I know. I don't see anybody. Tom didn't answer for a second. Then he said quietly, I didn't say I saw someone in the hallway. My stomach tightened. I saw someone looking out one of the classroom windows. I slowly turned toward room 309. Its blinds were halfway open. The classroom was dark. Which room? I can't tell from here. I kept staring at the window. Nothing moved. Mike? I'm listening. I know this sounds strange, but I think whoever it was ducked down when they saw me looking. Every instinct told me not to go back. Instead, I started walking toward the stairwell. I'll meet you downstairs. Copy. I was almost there when I heard it. A loud bang. Metal hitting metal. It came from behind me. I spun around. My cleaning cart had tipped over. Buckets and supplies were scattered across the hallway. I knew I'd left it standing upright. There was no way it should have fallen over by itself. As I walked back toward it, I noticed something else. Fresh footprints. Not mine. Dark marks on the polished floor. They started beside the cart and disappeared into room 309. The door was open again. This time, I knew I hadn't imagined anything. I stepped backward and grabbed the radio. Tom. His voice came instantly. Go. Call the police. Why? There's somebody inside the school. Before he could answer, I heard a voice. Very quietly. From inside the classroom. Don't leave. It wasn't loud. It wasn't threatening. If anything, it sounded calm. Almost conversational. And that made it even worse. Because it meant one thing. Whoever was inside had been close enough to hear every word I'd said. The voice echoed through the hallway. Don't leave. It wasn't shouted. It wasn't angry. It was quiet. Like someone speaking to a friend across the room. I backed away from the doorway without taking my eyes off it. My radio was still in my hand. Tom. My voice barely came out. I need you up here. Now. I'm already inside, he replied. Second floor. 30 seconds. 30 seconds suddenly felt like a lifetime. The classroom remained silent. Then, a chair scraped across the floor. Slowly. The sound stopped just inside the doorway. Someone was moving. But whoever it was staying where I couldn't see them. I picked up the handle of my mop and held it in front of me. Not because I thought it would do much. Just because I didn't want to stand there empty-handed. Then a man stepped into the doorway. He looked to be in his late 30s. Gray hoodie. Black baseball cap. Work boots. His clothes were dusty, like he'd been crawling through unfinished parts of the building. He didn't look surprised to see me. He looked annoyed. Like I'd interrupted something. He smiled. You work here? I didn't answer. He took one slow step into the hallway. I got locked in. It sounded rehearsed. Too quick. Too calm. If that's true, I said, stay right there. He ignored me and took another step. I've been trying to find a way out. Behind me, I heard the stairwell door burst open. Tom. The man heard it too. His eyes shifted past me for a split second. Then he turned and ran. Not toward the stairs. Toward the science wing. Stop. Tom shouted. We both took off after him. The third-floor hallway seemed endless. The man knew exactly where he was going. He cut through an open fire door and disappeared around the corner. By the time we reached it, he was gone. We searched every nearby classroom. Every storage closet. Nothing. Then Tom yelled from farther down the hall. The window! One of the science lab windows had been forced open. Outside, a maintenance ladder was leaning against the wall. The man had climbed down before we reached the room. By the time police arrived, he was gone. Officers searched the campus and the wooded area behind the school for over 2 hours. They never found him. But they did find where he'd been hiding. Above room 309 was a narrow maintenance space between the classroom ceiling and the roof. It wasn't meant for storage. Just pipes, wiring, and ventilation ducts. Someone had been living there. There was a sleeping bag. Empty water bottles. Protein bar wrappers. A flashlight. A portable phone charger. And a notebook. The notebook contained nothing but dates. Every page listed the days the school stayed open late. Basketball games. Band practice. Parent-teacher conferences. Club meetings. Events that kept people in the building after normal hours. Police believed he'd been slipping into the school through an old maintenance access door that didn't always latch properly. He'd wait until everyone was distracted, then climb into the ceiling space before anyone noticed. When the building emptied out, he'd come back down. No one knows how many nights he'd been inside that school before we found him. The security cameras only caught brief glimpses of him. A shadow crossing a hallway. A reflection in a window. Someone just outside the edge of the frame. Never enough to identify him. The maintenance door was repaired the very next week. The ceiling access panels were secured with new locks. Additional cameras were installed. I stayed at that school for another year. People sometimes asked why I always checked every classroom twice before locking up. I'd just smile and tell them. Old habit. The truth was different. I learned that night that a locked door doesn't always mean an empty room. And silence doesn't always mean you're alone. Even now, years later, whenever I lock up a building before leaving, I still pause for a second. I tug on every door handle twice. Then I look through the small window one last time. Not because I expect to see someone, but because once I locked a classroom that I thought was empty. Someone was still inside. And they had been watching me the entire time. Thanks for watching. Please like and subscribe.